Started. I'm Congressman Matt Cartwright, and I work for you. Hey. I got a microphone. Can you hear me? All right, what I want to do is, and if you've come to one of my town halls before, you've already suffered through this, but a lot of you haven't, and I want to make sure you know this stuff. I want to talk to you about the services that we provide in my congressional office here in northeastern Pennsylvania, so that you know. And let's run over them if we can. Okay, so if you think about it, the federal government, I am your representative with the federal government, and you have a lot of ways you might interact with the federal government. One of them is veterans and military affairs. We have a wonderful staff that I have worked very hard at assembling. We have Sabrina McLaughlin, who sits in our Pottsville office, and she works on any kind of problems that you're having with the VA system, with the military, military records requests, military medal requests. That's actually one of my very favorite parts of being a member of the Congress, is that from time to time we run across people who did not properly get the service decorations that they earned wearing the uniform for our nation. We've had about 6 instances where we were able to get military decorations awarded, and on behalf of the President of the United States, whoever it is at the time, I am able to award these military decorations. Purple Hearts, we've had 3 Bronze Stars awarded for all kinds of military conflicts. Going back to World War I, we had a lady in Pittston Township whose father, she was 75 years old, and her father never got his Purple Heart for the Battle of the Somme, where he had a couple of fingers blown off by shrapnel. These are very touching moments, and it is an honor, deep honor for me to be involved in those things. So I beg you, if you know somebody who served and did not get his or her service awards, please let us know. And Sabrina McLaughlin will dig her teeth in and get after these things for you. It's one of the things we do. Headstones and grave markers. And the VA has a lot of different programs. And like any other big outfit, mistakes happen, and bureaucracies mess up, and that's where your member of Congress is supposed to help you, and that's what I mean to do. And we have been doing it for 4¼ years now. And anytime there's any kind of VA problem, we want to know about it. And of course, there was a VA scandal nationwide about case managers misstating waiting times and things like that. We didn't have anything approaching that level of scandal around here, but if I depend on all of you to be my eyes and ears. If something like that crops up, please tell us. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Next one, Brian. Your favorite federal agency is the IRS, and occasionally they mess up too. The truth is that if it's a problem that you have to approach your member of Congress to help you with the IRS, you've probably exhausted a lot of your other options, you know, like working with a CPA, working with a tax lawyer. So we're kind of the St. Jude of working with the IRS. But we have had some success, and I want to tell you, when you have a dispute with the IRS, time is not your friend. Because if they think you owe money, even if you don't think you do, the more time that goes by, the higher the interest and the penalties grow. And we've seen cases where you know, the original amount is way down here, and the interest and the penalties dwarf the original amount. So don't let that happen. If you have something like this and you think we can help or we might be able to help, contact us. At a minimum, what we are able to do, these federal agencies, most of them have congressional liaison officers. So what that means is that we can help them bump your case up closer to the top of the inbox. And the answer still might not be any good, but at least you get a little quicker service sometimes when you deal through our office. Next one, Brian. USCIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services, visas, passports, applications, instructions, petitions. It's one area that we're actually very efficient at is passports. If you know anybody who ever went on a cruise, a lot of people go on cruises and the travel agent never told them, oh, by the way, you have to have a passport to go on this cruise. So this is a recurring situation where people call us up in a panic and they, you know, I'm going on a cruise, I don't have a passport, or my passport I just realized is expired. What can you do? And then when you say, well, when's the boat leave? Well, it leaves in 3 days. Unbelievably, we have been able to pull a rabbit out of a hat in cases like that. Sometimes it means hoofing it down to Philadelphia at 6th and Market and waiting from 6 o'clock in the morning in line to make sure you get quick action. But we can tell you what to do in cases like that, and we have had some major successes that way. Next one, Brian. But, you know, there's a lot of world travel going on and people going this way and that way, and family members being born abroad, and you need papers, you need certificates and authentication of documents, wills, affidavits, birth certificates, things like that. We are able to help because there again, the U.S. State Department does have a congressional liaison, and they can bump things up to the top of the inbox for us. Right. So you went too far. Social Security. This is a hugely important program in northeastern Pennsylvania. Vast numbers of people depend on Social Security benefits. I have 6 counties in our congressional district. The only complete county I have is Schuylkill County. The other ones I have half counties. For example, I have half of Luzerne, half of Lackawanna. I like to say my district is so gerrymandered that it is a shape that does not occur in nature. But Schuylkill County we can get statistics from, and there are 150,000 people in Schuylkill County, and how many people you think are on Social Security, either old age retirement benefits or disability benefits? 38,000 people. Huge number of people depending on that program. And I think that's pretty representative of what it's like in the rest of the district. So we're here to pitch in and help make sure that program works. And if you take 38,000 people, what we also know, if you talk to investment advisors or financial planners, they'll tell you right now, it's approaching 40% of those people who rely on Social Security as their sole source of support. So average monthly income for Social Security, old age retirement benefits, $1,305 a month. That's not a lot of money. And so if that check comes late, that's a big problem for a family. If the amount is wrong, if there's some mistake, that's a big problem. And so if you know somebody who's having a problem with Social Security, again, get in touch with us. our specialist for Social Security has joined us, and Krista Mekadon, wave hello to everybody. And she's another lady who can pull a rabbit out of a hat and has done so for many people involving Social Security. And of course, hand in hand, we just passed the 50th anniversary of Medicare. Hand in hand with Social Security is Medicare. And Medicare is, you know, it's a big health insurance company. And there are those who are very impressed with the way Medicare operates on only 3% administrative expenses and feel like we ought to have Medicare for all. We can talk about that later. But we do have Medicare for some right now, and for a lot of people. And Medicare, like any other big outfit, makes mistakes. And we're here to help that as well. If you have, for example, a healthcare provider who isn't properly being paid by Medicare, and you want to make sure that he or she is, it's appropriate to give us a call, and we'll see if we can help. And you know, drug questions and coverage questions, things like that. Again, Krista has really learned the ropes on that, and we're grateful to have Mrs. Mekadon's help in all of that. Let's go to the next one, Brian. Economic development. Now I have 8 staffers. I'm allowed to hire 8 staffers on my allowance as a member of Congress in Pennsylvania. And economic development around here is really important to me. Working on jobs in the economy is vital. It's something I think about all the time, it's something I work on all the time, and it's something I talk about a lot too. In the old days, members of Congress used to have something called earmarks. Raise your hand if you ever heard of earmarks. Okay, well, earmarks was a way to basically give every member of Congress a checkbook. And, you know, if Mayor Moss, for example, has an important project and that he wants me to help him with, a bridge project, I would look over the project and see if it makes sense, and see if it makes more sense than other things going on, other people applying for the money, and then if I like it, then I write the check, and it might be, you know, it might be a $95,000 check, and it might be a $300,000 check, but that's the way it used to happen. So when previous members of Congress, like Dan Flood or Joe McDade or people like that, served, a lot of what they did was they wrote checks, and that was earmark money. Well, that became a bad thing. That fell into disrepute. And the thing that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back on earmarks was the bridge to nowhere in Alaska. Anybody remember that one? Yeah. Right. So that's what gave earmarks a bad name. And I'm here to tell you, that story, it's true. They really did build a bridge to nowhere in Alaska, and it was because Congressman Don Young, who is still serving in the Congress, was there forever and had the seniority and had the power, and the reason he did it was because he could, and put a lot of people to work in his part of Alaska building a bridge for no particular reason. So that killed earmarks, and so, but the money is still spent on all of the program, the same sorts of things. But it just goes through grant programs, okay? So roads and bridges and water systems and sewer systems and things like that, they still get federal money, but it goes through the executive branch and it goes through grant programs. What does that mean? It means that when Mayor Moss wants to get some money, now he has to write a grant proposal, and he has to know which agency is doing the grant, and he has to figure out what's the best way to submit it and what's the time deadline and all of that. There's a lot that goes into that. And my job is to try to keep our fair share of this federal money flowing to northeastern Pennsylvania. And the way I do it is, out of those 8 staffers I told you about, fully three of them are dedicated to economic development and facilitating the municipalities putting in for these grants. Now, as I said, it's complicated. There are 24 major agencies of the federal government, and many of them have grant programs, and it's not intuitive. Downtown Wilkes-Barre can get a grant from the Agriculture Department. Go figure. It takes study, and it takes a lot of know-how, and one thing that we do, I started 3 years ago, was I started a mayor's conference. So Mayor Moss can come, and so can all of the other mayors in the district. It's not limited to mayors. There might be a chairperson of a board of supervisors or people like that, the people who get involved in writing grants. We bring them to a mayor's conference. This one will be in May this year, and the idea is to spread the knowledge. We on our staff, we don't write these grants, we can only facilitate them, but we spread the knowledge among all of the municipal leaders in the district, and that way they know what grants are available and they don't leave vital federal money on the table. So we do a lot of that as well. I think we're about done. Well, we do all kinds of other individual things. You know, a lot of people mine coal around here that are still alive and have black lung and are getting black lung benefits. There again, if there's a problem with that, we want to know about it because our specialists will work on that. Department of Education student loan issues. We have our wonderful Jennifer Manganello. Wave hello to everybody, Jennifer. She works on student loan issues and also any other kind of financial issues that you might have, some need of interacting with the federal government. Post office issues, Fannie Mae, TSA, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, housing and urban development issues. A great example of that is there's a big housing project in Wilkes-Barre that ended up being kind of having a crime infestation called Sherman Hills. And we saw the things that were going on there, and we saw the crimes always getting in the newspaper and on TV about Sherman Hills, and we were kind of scratching our heads about whether there's a way we can get involved and make ourselves useful about it. And then it happened. Then HUD came in and found all kinds of code violations at the Sherman Hills property. And these were violations of HUD regulations. So now there's a federal hook for us to get involved, and we did get involved, and I started a task force about Sherman Hills to get all different levels of government involved, and we put a lot of pressure. If there's one bad thing that was happening, there was an out-of-state landlord from New York that was just laughing his way to the bank with all of this HUD money that was supposed to be spent on putting up decent public housing for people. And he wasn't abiding by the HUD regulations. We put a lot of pressure, and I give credit to all of the other public officials like Senator John Udicek and Representative Eddie Day Pashinsky, and a lot of other public officials who joined together with me, and we pressured this landlord, and guess what? He left. He sold the whole shooting works to a different company out of Atlanta, and they had experience in turning around problem housing projects. And what they did was they went in there with high definition cameras, and they installed over 100 of them that feed directly into the Wilkes-Barre Police Department. And they are of a great assistance in cutting down on crime at Sherman Hills. You're never going to end crime, but there are things that you can do, and we try to make ourselves useful that way. EEOC, FEMA issues. The bottom line is, if you know somebody who's having a problem with the federal government, remember that the Cartwright Congressional Office is here to help you. Now, that's half of what I do. The other half is I work in Washington. And we have a a wonderful staff down there. I have another 8 staffers that help me work on legislation that others have written, and they're asking for our support, legislation that we have written. We've had some legislative successes. For example, I push very hard. The biggest employer in our district is Toby Hanna Army Depot, and there are folks right here in Pittston that work up there, and getting the wage grade employees raises every year. That requires legislation every year, and we do it, and we get it passed. Other, everything that goes on in Washington, I have a terrific staff down there, but what I want to make sure and tell you is that you're welcome to come down and visit. And for crying out loud, I don't get enough of you coming down to visit. I wait by the telephone, it doesn't ring. But come down and plan your trip well in advance, because the more notice you give us, the better we can do putting tours together for you, including tours of the White House. Now, the White House needs about 3 months advance notice, because they're going to run your Social Security number and make sure you're not somebody who's not appropriate to visit the White House, or going to jump over the fence or something. But there are other tours, like Capitol tours and tours that you may not have thought about. The National Engraving Center tour is one of the most popular tours out there. But other things that we can do. Also requests for flags for special occasions, things like that. All right, I'm going to shift gears now. And I'm going to ask Mr. Morgan. This is Robert Morgan, my district director. Wave hello to everybody, Bob. And Bob's been collecting.
Here, Bob, we have a question for you.
I'm ready for the questions, Bob. The first question is, can you speak of the overall mood in Washington lately? I'm going to be honest with you. There's a lot more friendliness and friendship going on in Washington than you see, and the reason for that is it's not the reason you don't see it is that's not going to sell any newspapers, to tell you Democrats are getting along with the Republicans this week. That's kind of boring, and it's not exciting, and it won't get on the news. So all you hear about, what do they say in the news? If it bleeds, it leads. They tend to favor bad news. There's plenty of good news going on. For one thing, there's a lot more bipartisanship than you think. But I'm a Democrat. But I'm here to tell you that some of my very best friends down in the House of Representatives are Republicans. People that you would all like.
I don't think
people that... Well, I'll give you an example. Steve and Cindy Russell. Steve Russell, I got elected in 2012. He got elected in 2014. He's from Oklahoma City. We do disagree on a lot of issues, but Steve is a 25-year veteran of the Army Rangers, and he got out as a lieutenant colonel. He had 5 tours of duty, including Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan. He walks around with the combat infantryman's badge. If you ever see that, it's a long rectangular badge, silver with a blue background, and it's got a silver rifle on it. That is the CIB, the Combat Infantryman's Badge. And if you see somebody wearing that, thank them, because they had people shooting at them as they defended your liberty.
Yeah, I have one too.
You have one?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very true.
So, Steve Russell, he got my attention because of that, but then I learned more about him. He and his wife, Cindy, were in Bosnia. And do you remember when there was a big hue and cry about whether we were going to continue to take Syrian refugees in this country? You know, all of these widows and orphans that were applying to be resettled by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. And there were people saying, no, we can't take Syrian refugees. I didn't agree with that, but the whole Republican House was ready to pass a bill to stop Syrian refugees coming to the United States. Russell went up to the podium, and he argued against stopping refugees, because when he and his wife Cindy were in Bosnia, you know, one thing that happens is that servicemen and women serving in war-torn places, they see the suffering, they see the widows and the orphans around, and their heart goes out to them. Steve and Cindy Russell adopted 3 Muslim children from Bosnia in the mid-90s when they were there. That's walking the walk. And that got my attention. But when they were starting to do all of the hullabaloo about whether we were going to allow the refugee program to continue, Russell went up to the podium and he made an impassioned speech about not abandoning our American values of decency. This is a Republican from Oklahoma City. That got my attention. And it also told me that people who have had live ammunition being shot at them aren't really afraid of Republican House leadership. So I'm here to tell you, the mood in Washington is not as bad as you think. I am personally rooting for Donald Trump to find his footing. He's made a lot of very tall promises, and I'd like to see him keep them. I would like to see Donald Trump come through with his promise of $1 trillion on American infrastructure, because that is the kind of thing that can put a lot of our people to work right here in northeastern Pennsylvania. Right here, we have crumbling roads, we have bridges that are falling apart, we have sewer and water systems that need upgrading. We have a housing stock that is as old as all of our grandparents. You want to make America great again, you build America great again, and I'd like to see them do it. Now, this budget that they came out with, I want to talk about that a little bit. The budget doesn't mention a thing about spending $1 trillion on infrastructure. In fact, it cuts every single thing except defense spending. Well, I didn't read the footnotes. Maybe the $1 trillion is in the footnotes someplace. But I have no doubt that budget was not something that President Trump put together. I think that was the brainchild of Mick Mulvaney, who is a hardline right-wing, one of the founders of the Freedom Caucus. And they believe in cutting government no matter what gets hurt, no matter who gets hurt. And so that's why they come up with a budget that cuts off low-income heating, LIHEAP, cuts it off. Cuts Meals on Wheels. Did you see him on TV explaining, oh, Meals on Wheels isn't working. We're not satisfied that program is working. Well, Mick, here's how you know if Meals on Wheels is working. They eat the meal and they continue to live. I don't think Donald Trump even read that budget. I really don't. And it's just a messaging tool. So that was a long answer. Sorry for that. But the bottom line is that the mood isn't as bad as you think, and people are more cooperative and more hopeful than you think. I didn't bring my reading glasses. I'm sorry. The first one
Yes. In light of the increasing amount of, it's actually a separate question here.
Okay.
All right, so it is,
I can read that.
okay, that you can do?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, the first one is about redistricting. Would you support citizens of our state in the effort to reform the redistricting and reapportioning process? And the next one is about money in politics. Wow. Where's Peter? Good question. And those are questions that I could spend a very long time on. It's true. One of the big problems of government these days is the gerrymandering. And so you have these districts that are very deeply Democrat or very deeply Republican. And what that means is that you end up with representatives who disagree with each other about everything. There's plenty of blame to go around, because when the Republicans are in charge, they gerrymander it to minimize the number of Democratic representatives. But Democrats do the same thing when they're in charge. Is there a way to fix that? You bet there is. But it has to be state by state, and it has to be done by courageous individuals who are willing to buck their own parties and create fair districts. As I mentioned, my district, it looks like some kind of deformed starfish. And there's a district down near Philadelphia that looks like a Rorschach ink block test. Crazy. But it can be fixed if the will is there. They did it in California.
Yes.
And they did it despite the opposition of Democratic leadership. Democratic Party leadership they were afraid of what would have happened. In the end, actually, the Democrats picked up a couple of seats. But I think Americans are tired of the food fighting that goes on. I think that's part of it. Too much cable news is another problem. But the other question you raised, Peter, was money. PACs, super PACs, lobbyists. Will you support reforms such as those embodied in the American Anti-Corruption Act to limit the influence of all this money in politics? Of course I would. It's terrible. And what it means is that members of Congress have to spend an inordinate amount of time raising money so that they get reelected. And it's an insidious problem, because you can't depend on the people that are in office to change the rules, because those are the rules that got them elected and keep them elected. And why would they want to change the rules to make it easier for outsiders to challenge them for their elected seats? I'm in favor of changing those rules. I'm not doing this job to make a living. I worked for 25 years as a lawyer, and I'm doing this job to help people, and because I consider it an honor to do it. But it's a tall order, getting the money out of politics. I was disappointed in the presidential election more than any other reason, because it means our chances of overturning Citizens United have gone way, way down. And Citizens United is the Supreme Court of the United States decision that said the First Amendment requires that you you can't limit the amount of money in politics because money equals speech, and that includes corporate speech because corporations are people, my friend. Remember that? So, as I said, I don't think we're going to be able to depend on the Congress to change these rules. The only thing that I think would really work would be if we got a better Supreme Court that then would overrule Citizens United, and because of a recognition that this money in politics is wrecking our democracy because money talks too loud in Washington. And so, for example, and let me give you a concrete example of that. The environmental laws, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, they protect all of us. I don't use the word regulations, by the way. I talk about protections. And the Environmental Protection Agency is full of protections, and they enact protections. And did you know that the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act do not apply to the oil industry or the gas industry?
Gee, why?
They are exempt. They are exempt. Oil and gas are exempt from the environmental laws that every other industry has to comply with. Now, why is that? Is it because we're not worried about oil pollution or gas pollution? No. It's because they can do it. They have the money to lobby and buy and sell legislation. And that is what you get. That is the pernicious influence of all this money in politics. That's just one example, and there's a lot more. So it's something that you kind of push my button there.
Good.
That's something I feel very strongly about.
What's the plan to stop it? To get rid of it?
I don't know.
Stop lobbies.
Yeah, it is.
No more lobbies.
The only way we can do it, in my view, is to get a better Supreme Court. And it didn't happen this time, but my hope is eventually it will. Yeah, it might not be in our lifetimes. You're right. What is the best way to fix health care? Because Obamacare is not working. Is taxes a percentage tax on products? Across the board tax like a sales tax? Okay, so the question of health care. Of course, we are wrestling with that in Washington right now, and there are voices that want to do away with the Affordable Care Act. That was enacted in March of 2010. I was elected in 2012, but I have been a vocal supporter of the ACA, and I'll tell you why. Because I think it strengthens our hospitals, and it helps our healthcare providers. I used to be on the board of directors of a small hospital up in Peckville called the Mid-Valley Hospital, and I was on that for about 7 years. It was long enough to understand how healthcare finance worked and what was going on with money in hospitals. And here's what was happening. We saw it. The law requires hospitals to treat people that show up at their doors that need to be stabilized. So if you show up with a big gash, they have to treat you and ask questions about money and insurance later on. And so that was happening more and more. You know, for the last 25 years at least, health insurance has gone up and up and up. And employers know it. People who bought health policies for their staffs, they would have double-digit increases just about every year throughout the early 2000s. It was getting very expensive, and so as a result, employers were dropping health insurance. Employees couldn't afford to go out and buy it, and more people were going without insurance. And the same number of people get sick and hurt, and they show up at the hospital, and the hospitals provide more and more uncompensated care. So when a hospital gives uncompensated care, who pays for that? The hospital does. It comes out of their budget, and they have to balance their budget. And now they can't change fixed costs like the lighting and the heating and the mortgage payment if they have one. But what they do is they go after the variable costs. They cut people. They cut nurses and technicians, and they keep cutting. They have to keep cutting because that's the only thing they can do. They keep cutting to the point where you end up with one med-surg nurse watching 24 patients, and that's dangerous. And maybe they lose their Joint Commission accreditation. And then after that, they lose their state accreditation. And then they go belly up. And it's not theoretical. In 2012, before the expansion of Medicaid under ACA in Pennsylvania that insured 700,000 more Pennsylvanians, before that happened, we lost 2 hospitals in northeastern Pennsylvania. We lost the Marion Community Hospital in Carbondale, and we lost St. Catherine's Hospital in Fountain Springs near Ashland, Pennsylvania. When you lose your local hospital, there's nothing theoretical about that. You have suffered a tangible, real difference, real degradation in your health care. Because if you're having a stroke, it makes a huge difference whether it's a 10-minute ride to the hospital or a 35-minute ride to the hospital. The neurologists tell us that in a stroke situation, lost time equals lost brain. Or if you're having a heart attack or any other medical emergency, that's a real difference. So to me, I like the Affordable Care Act because it insured more people, and that meant the hospitals were on a firmer financial footing and were less likely to go out of business. I told you I have Pottsville in my district. Pottsville has Schuylkill Regional Health. It was called a different thing about somebody leaning against the light switch. I had the administrator of Schuylkill Health at the time, a man named Simidachek. He told me, look, if Governor Corbett does not accept the Medicaid expansion, I'm going to have to close down half of my operation here in Pottsville. And that's basically the only major hospital in that whole county. Fortunately, bowing to pressure, Governor Corbett did accept the Medicaid expansion. We did get 700,000 more people insured in Pennsylvania, and I thought that was a good thing. But I'm here to tell you, there's lots of problems with the ACA. I've said that all along. There are some people paying too much money in premiums under the ACA.
That was before the ACA too.
It was before the ACA, and I think I mentioned that costs were going up and up and up. I think that deductibles are too high on a lot of the policies. I think there's not enough competition, not enough insurers to choose from in a lot of places. All of these things are things I think we have to tackle, and I know that on my side of the aisle we've said we're ready, willing, and able to do it. So now, God bless them, the Republicans have spent 7 years screaming about repealing the ACA, and I think every single one of President Trump's campaign stump speeches started and ended with repealing Obamacare. And so that's a promise they made, and they feel like they have to keep it. And so they came up with the AHCA. And I had some major problems with that. First of all, it was a huge tax break for billionaires. I don't know why they thought that was good for addressing health care, but that was in there. But more than that, remember I talked about some groups are charged too much in premiums? I think I'm on Obamacare, by the way, and I know how much it costs, and I know that people that are sort of pushing the Medicare generation, they pay a lot more than the younger people on it. Now there's a formula. They're not allowed to be charged more than 3 times what the younger people get charged. But under the HCA, they were going to let you, if you were between 50 and 64, they were going to let you be charged 5 times what the youngest people on it were charged. And what that meant was, on average, people in that age group, 50 to 64, were going to pay about $6 grand more a year in insurance premiums. That wasn't, I mean, how was that fulfilling any pledges for making things better? And I think a lot of people saw that, and there were a lot of other problems with it. You know what the biggest problem was? They rushed it. They rushed it. They didn't have any hearings at all. And there's one group they really didn't talk to, and it's maybe the most important group of all, and that's the for-profit private health insurance companies that sell all this insurance. Remember, Obamacare is not the government insuring you. It's not. This is for-profit private health insurance companies working in the Obamacare system and selling you this insurance. They're making money on it. And the rule is that they're not allowed to make more than 20% in profit and administrative expenses under the ACA. But the problem with rushing the replacement plan was they didn't have hearings, and they didn't talk to the health insurance companies that were supposed to be a part of it. If those health insurance companies didn't take part in it, it isn't happening. So it just didn't make any sense to me, and it wasn't a surprise when they pulled that bill. Now, I wasn't out there dancing a jig when they pulled that bill. We still have the current system. We still have a lot of people that pay too much and have deductibles that are way too high and pay too much for drugs. We have, yeah, keep that sign up for crying out loud. But we do. We pay way too much for drugs. And you know, one thing that I was unhappy about was that the Senate just voted down allowing drugs to be bought from Canada. And the excuse was, well, we can't be sure that they have the same safety standard. And I laughed too. I laughed too, because you know, if people were dropping like flies from poison medicine in Canada, we might have heard about it.
I have a question. Why won't the Congress of the United States allow them to negotiate?
That's the other thing. Is
The
that
only people that can do it is the VA. But why? What about the rest? Nobody else can negotiate.
If you didn't hear the question, and that is, thank you for that. That's a big problem. The VA system is allowed to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies for drug prices, but Medicare is not. Medicare is not allowed to. Okay, remember I talked about how big money controlled oil and gas and how they're exempt from EPA? You think that there's anything going on there about big pharma?
Yeah.
You bet there is. It's all about the money. That's what it is. You turn on the NBC News, the CBS News, the ABC News. What's every other commercial? It's drugs. It takes you know how expensive that is to advertise on those news programs?
They own the news channels too.
Yeah.
It's free advertising.
So it's all going. That's why, to me, Citizens United was the most important part of that election. And let's all pray every night that one day we get a Supreme Court that has the guts to overrule it. Now I'm reading from written questions here that people wrote out. And I want to give them the courtesy of getting through them if I can. Will the Democrats in the House and Senate remain committed to stopping the GOP from repealing and replacing the ACA? I think we've talked enough about health care right now. Question, the medical device manufacturers.
What about the 800 people that work in Pittston Township at Maximus that all lose their jobs if the Affordable Care Act is repealed? That all pay at least $20 an hour. I mean, that's a big issue in this district alone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know, I don't think there is too much time to talk about healthcare. Well, of course, but that's a local issue that, and I work there.
Everybody hear that? Well, we have a lot of people locally employed because of the ACA, and that is all true. But, you know, connected with that, there are a lot of voices that I touched on it earlier. There are a lot of voices that want to have single payer in this country, Medicare for everybody, because Medicare really kind of works pretty well. And the truth is, if that came up for a vote in the U.S. House, I would vote for that. I would.
Would you co-sponsor it?
But the problem is that that would cause a lot of pain, a lot of upheaval, because as was mentioned, a lot of people are employed processing health insurance claims from the way it's done now. So there's a trade-off with everything. But beyond that, that's another place we talk about money and politics. Look, there are companies that will push back on protections and regulations that don't like, the clean streams rule, or they don't like this rule or that rule, because it annoys them and it drives their prices up a little bit, and they don't like that. But when you talk about going to single payer, we're not talking about annoying the private for-profit health insurance industry. We're not talking about making their lives a little harder.
Put 'em right out of
We're
business.
talking about driving them into extinction.
Yes.
And that's when the claws come out. Now everybody here was around when they were starting to talk about enacting the Affordable Care Act about 10 years ago. And ads came up on TV, and it was Harry and Louise sitting at the kitchen table talking about how this Obama guy is going to prevent us from seeing our favorite doctor, Marcus Welby, down the street with this new cockamamie healthcare plan. And what was that about? That was about scaring Americans away from Obamacare. And it worked. Everybody went out of their minds when they passed it. You know, these town halls, they weren't also friendly for Democrats then. And there was a lot of shouting and screaming from all the people that said, you know, what about Harry and Louise? They're right. I want to keep my doctor and all of this stuff. So what I'm
ACA, but against Obamacare.
So what I'm saying is that if we move towards single payer, it's going to be the same thing all over
I'd
again.
happily give up my job if that means everybody could have health care.
What a guy.
The best countries in the world all have it. The
Right.
top countries in the world with the highest standard of living have all it. What are we doing? We're 19th in the world and going to 20th. Why? Because the Republicans refuse to do anything.
I also want to talk I want to add another piece about this that I like about the Affordable Care Act, and that I like about having more and more people insured, because it's a smarter way to spend money. One thing, was mentioned that other countries, how they do it in other countries, and one thing that studies show consistently, we spend way too much money on health care in this country. Way too much. Now, why is that? Well, one example is the uninsured. Remember I talked about the people that show up at the emergency rooms without insurance? Well, how does that happen? They're all individual stories, but let's say there's one story. There's somebody at home chopping tomatoes up, and they take a good slice out of their index finger, and it's a deep cut. But they don't have insurance, so they put some Neosporin on it and they put a Band-Aid on it and hope that's going to work. But 12 hours later, this thing is really throbbing, and so they start popping aspirins and ibuprofen but then another 12 hours goes by and it's starting to turn colors, and it's really throbbing and they can't sleep. And they think, well, I don't have insurance. but I get paid at the end of the week, so I'll have some money and go to the doctor then. But another day goes by and it turns from green to black, and it's moving up the finger, and it's absolutely excruciating, and they don't have any choice. They go to where do they go? The emergency room. They go to the emergency room, and this person is in full gangrene, and goes to the emergency room, and an alert medical person picks this up, calls in the orthopedic surgeon consult, and that finger gets chopped off to save their lives. So you end up with a person who loses a finger, ends up with about a $30,000 hospital stay, okay? Instead of what? If they had coverage the whole time, they would have gone to the family doctor, who would have stitched them up right, would have put them on antibiotics, and nipped the whole thing in the bud. Why do we spend money like this? In part, it's because we allow so many people to go uninsured. So I tend to agree that if a single payer came up, I would vote for it, and darn the consequences. Can Congress or the President put any pressure on pharmaceutical companies to control prices? I understand that drug companies charge less money for prescriptions in Canada. Also medical service, very greatly in the U.S. Yeah, we talked about that. I'm all in favor of allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices and to allow people to buy drugs in Canada. Okay, we talked about single payer. My worst fears of the Trump presidency, that of him squaring off with Kim Jong-un, are coming into play. Are there any safeguards in place to prevent Trump from bombing a country that has nukes? That is a well-stated question. The way it's supposed to work is that Congress is supposed to authorize the president to engage in military action. For the last 15 years, the presidents have been working under something called the 2001 and 2002 authorizations for the use of military force. And you've heard that acronym, AUMF, Authorization for the Use of Military Force. And you think, well, what could anything that President George W. Bush have done, what could anything that President Obama have done, what could anything that President Trump is doing, what could that have to do with an authorization given back in, actually it was 2002 and 2003. What, how could that properly be the legal justification for anything they're doing now? And the answer is it isn't. It's all a legal fiction. They engage in these legal limbo dances to justify the president taking action without a declaration of war, without an authorization for the use of force. I will say that President Obama, he was pretty fond of using drones, and I'm not sure of the wisdom of that. I think with every drone strike, you may kill one terrorist, and you may incite a whole village of new terrorists. But I don't claim to be an expert on that. But I remember that when he was talking about bombing Syria, when they first used the chemical weapons in 2013, they did that. It was pretty obvious that President Assad bombed his own citizens with chemical weapons, poisoned them. And it was horrible. And we saw the images then. But President Obama, he put it to Congress. He eventually punted it over to the Congress to decide whether he should bomb the airstrips in Syria. And I remember that because I was wringing my hands about that. I was looking into it. I was researching it. One of the things that happened to me when I was a freshman, I was elected freshman class president, which doesn't mean anything. I was like the social director, okay? But what it meant was that I had to arrange gatherings, and I did. And the trick was to try to get Democrats and Republicans to come to the gatherings, and the way you did it was you got a good speaker. And one time I got Bill Gates to come speak. We got all the Republicans in that one. And one time I got Madeleine Albright to come. And she's about 4 feet tall, but this lady is a giant in American diplomacy, and one of the wisest people I have ever talked to. You ever talk to somebody that every word that comes out of their mouth, as soon as you hear it, you know it's true and you know it's right? She's one of those people, a very special lady. And I made a proper fuss over her when I introduced her. And so, God bless her, she remembered me because I called her up to ask her advice about what to do in Syria in 2013. And what a wonderful lady. She spent 25 minutes on the phone with me talking about the interaction between diplomacy and the threat of the use of force, and her experience with that. As it happened, it never did come up for a vote, and they never did do the bombing. But now we have, President Trump going ahead and dropping 59 missiles in the same situation. But he didn't slow down and ask the Congress, if you noticed. And so it's a good question. My answer is I am all for revisiting and redrafting and redoing and revoting on a current version of the AUMF. And I will be raising my voice to that end.
Very good.
What are your thoughts on the Secretary of Education planning to cut costs on public education? I disapprove very strongly of that. My own view of it is that America, we have a lot of things that make our country the best country in the world. And of all of them, right up near the top is opportunity. Opportunity to make a wonderful life for yourself. The pursuit of happiness. We do it here in America. We do it right. And we don't have these striations of class hierarchy. We don't have royalty in this country, and we don't have dukes and earls and duchesses, and we believe that everybody can grow up to be Bill Gates or the President of the United States. We believe that. It's part of what makes us American. But you have to have the tools to do it. And everybody who thinks about this for 30 seconds realizes that education is the most important tool that allows upward mobility through the classes in our country. Because if you want to make a lot of money, you got to work hard in school. We teach our children that. But they have to be good enough schools. They have to be schools where you can learn the right things that get you the places where you need to go. And if we only allow the people who can afford the most expensive schools to do that, we're cutting off opportunity. Opportunity is only a theory then, it's not a reality for everybody. And I have a much longer speech I could give you about that, but that's the way I feel about it. And that's why I thought Betsy DeVos was the wrong choice for the Secretary of Education. You need somebody in there that believes in public education. I was okay with some of the cabinet choices, I really was. There's a couple of them I really like. I really like this H.R. McMaster fellow. I think he's a moderating influence on Donald Trump, and Secretary Mattis as well. You never would think that somebody whose nickname is Mad Dog would be a moderating influence, but he is, and he gets together with McMaster. Remember, McMaster wrote this book about how Bob McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense for Kennedy and Johnson, and the book was called Dereliction of Duty, and he was very critical of McNamara for not leveling with these presidents about how hard it was going to be to win in Vietnam. And so what is McMaster all about? He's about speaking truth to power. And if ever there was a time in the history of our republic where we needed somebody who's going to speak truth to power, it is the military leaders speaking to our current president. So I'm very happy about McMaster being in there. But I'm not happy about Betsy DeVos, just to make it very clear. Can you address why the establishment Democratic Party has no message or ideas? What happened to the party of the New Deal and fighting for it? Uh-oh. Nancy Pelosi and establishment need to make room for Bernie Sanders Democrats. Thank you.
When does the revolt start?
So, the question there was, why does the establishment Dem Party have no message or ideas?
So that's my question. Let me just elaborate 1 second. You don't hear anything from the Democrats other than anti-Trump. What happened to $15 minimum wage, infrastructure projects? I think, 29 to 39 governorships across the country are Republican. State legislatures across the country are almost all Republican. The House, the Senate, the White House. Why do we still have the same leadership that led us to this position? Is it time for a change?
Right, exactly.
Okay. That's a big question, and it would take a long time to give you a complete answer.
Money.
I will say this, speaking as a member of the Democratic caucus in the House, it is tiresome being a member of the minority in the House. It's tiresome because all of the committee structure is controlled by the majority party. I served 4 years on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee and also on the Natural Resources Committee. And it's painful. I told you, I really care about sticking up for clean air and clean water. Natural Resources Committee, it's all of the people that feel the way I do on the one side, and it's all of the oil and gas people on the other side that feel that the only question is how fast can we repeal all the protections for the environment. And we are powerless to do anything in those committees because they control the hearing structure, who the witnesses are, and whether bills even get a vote to come out of committee.
We had a Democratic president for 8 years.
And as a result, the only thing we could do, the only thing I have been able to do is work with the Democratic president in the White House. He's gone now too. So
Right.
if you're, it's kind of easy to be a glass half empty kind of guy right now. But I've never been that way, and I think there's no give up in me. Okay, and I think messaging is right, and I think we have to do a better job of it. I can tell you that there are changes being made. Yes, Nancy Pelosi continues to be the leader in the House. You do have what I will say is probably an overemphasis on the viewpoints that come out of the coasts, the East Coast and the West Coast. That's, if you look at a map of where all these Democrats come from, it's predominantly it's the coastal people, and it's the inland folks like yours truly Sometimes I feel like John the Baptist out in the wilderness. We had a challenge to Democratic leadership by my dear friend Tim Ryan from Youngstown, Ohio. An area that is not very different from around here in the makeup of the people and the conditions of the economy. And he felt that a change had to happen, and that a message had to be deployed that would appeal more to the heartland of America people. And he lost. He ran against Nancy Pelosi, and he lost. But she's not an idiot. She got the message, and she actually started a new messaging committee, and she put a terrific lady on there from Peoria, Illinois, Sherry Bustos. Sherry is from the heartland, and she understands the message that would probably work a lot better on folks around here.
Exactly. The Democratic Party is supposed to be the party of the working people. And we abandoned those ideals 20, 30 years ago. We let the Republican Party hijack what was the Democratic Party's bread and butter throughout history.
Well, I'm not going to agree 100% with that, because I consider myself, when I first ran, I called myself a Roosevelt Democrat. I believe in progressive ideals that fired up the Roosevelt era. That's why I stick up for Social Security and Medicare as strongly as I do. But I think the failure of the Democratic message is more about not emphasizing jobs and the economy enough. And really, I think it's possible to blame Nancy Pelosi a little too much. I want to tell you, all of us respect hard work. I've never met anybody that works harder than that lady.
Sure.
It's unbelievable. But the message has to be honed a little better, and we have to concentrate on jobs in the economy. And around here, Donald Trump won my district by over 10%. And why was that? Was it because people are bigoted? No, those are the same people that voted for Barack Obama when he was the change candidate. And I think that probably it would have been pretty hard for somebody as closely strapped to the status quo as Hillary Clinton to win. People say, oh, Joe Biden would have won. Well, Joe Biden was the status quo.
Bernie Sanders would have won.
And Bernie Sanders might have won.
Yeah.
We'll never know.
Well, hopefully in 2020.
Basically, you come up with the same message. Yeah. Basically, the same message.
Okay, what actions have you taken, and what actions do you plan to take to protect the Fourth Amendment? Okay, now we're talking about privacy. And privacy is a pretty important part of being American. That's why it made it up as high as number 4 on our list in the Bill of Rights. It's what protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures, and from warrantless searches of our homes. The Fourth Amendment matters to me, and privacy in general matters to me. We had a Fourth Amendment issue just come up recently where I was fighting on behalf of privacy, and it's about your use of the internet. And there was a bill that came up that was the procedural posture was that the Obama administration had put in a rule to prevent internet service providers from collecting your browsing history and selling it to whoever wants to buy. And typically who wants to buy is, commercial enterprises that want to see what you're interested in and want to advertise to you directly. The Republicans brought a bill up to kill that that rule. In other words, the Republican bill was to allow internet service providers to collect your browsing history without your permission and to sell it to whoever, or whatever company. And I voted no on it because I think that it makes more sense to ask people's permission if you're going to do that. So that's the latest example of what I've done to stick up for the Fourth Amendment. And from time to time, these questions come up, and I do tend to want to stick up for your privacy. My question is related to plans with the debt ceiling. Will there be any movement forward, or are we looking at another government shutdown? Yeah, that was in 2013. That was my first year as your congressman, and in the fall we had a government shutdown of 16 days. And I was one unhappy camper because of that. And I'll tell you why. They did that in October. Remember, they did that right around, they were trying to repeal Obamacare. And that's why they shut down the government, because we wouldn't agree to repeal the ACA. Why was I so angry about it? Because what's it like around here in October? It's when the leaves change colors. When you shut down the government in October, I have the Delaware Water Gap in my district, and the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area is part of the National Park Service. And if you look at all of the businesses, the little mom and pop quickie marts and gas stations and motels and hotels and restaurants all around the edges of that park, that's their bread and butter. That's Black Friday for them. It's leaf peeper season when all of the tourists show up at the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. That government shutdown for 16 days ruined that season for them. And we added it up. It cost about $400,000 a day in economic activity to northeastern Pennsylvania. And I'm still angry at the people that did it. And these are the people in the Freedom Caucus. Mick Mulvaney is one of the founders of it. They all still to this day think it's a good idea to shut the government down, these folks. But that's the bad news. The good news is it's only about 20 or 30 of them. And the other good news is that Paul Ryan can't stand them, and he understands the importance of keeping the government open. And when they go to shut down the government, what does Paul Ryan do? He comes to the Democrats to get the extra votes that he needs to keep the government open. I fully expect that to happen again, and I think the Republicans learned their lesson that it's a really dumb idea to shut the government down. The public doesn't like it, and you don't save money. You waste a lot of money stopping the government, sending out all the notices, and then starting it up again. All right, I'm going to do a couple more questions. Does Congress plan to put a stop to excessive spending and self-dealing by the Trump administration? What can Congress do to make Trump release his tax returns and to abide by the anti-nepotism laws? Okay, well, that's a good segue to what I was talking about before. Remember I told you that the Republicans control all of the committees in Congress? The one committee that I've been proud to sit on is the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and that's the one that investigated Nixon during Watergate, and when there's a big scandal, they get involved and investigate that. But the problem is that it's the majority party that controls the agenda of what gets investigated, and the minority party doesn't get to call the hearings, doesn't get to subpoena anything or anybody. And my view is that's why I think that the only way a proper investigation of what has self-dealing, the tax returns, all of that. The only way that gets done is if the House returns to Democratic hands in 2018. Because if that happens, then all of a sudden my dear friend Elijah Cummings from Baltimore, who is the ranking Democrat on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, then he has subpoena power, and that is a committee that can subpoena anything and anyone in the United States, including the President of the United States. He could subpoena the tax returns. He could subpoena all of the people that we suspect were meeting with Russians during the campaign, all of that stuff. If the House returns to Democratic control in 2018, every week there will be explosive hearings in that Oversight Committee. Now, you know that last fall I was honored to be put on the House Appropriations Committee. And I consider it an honor because so much of the good that Representatives Dan Flood and Joe McDade did for our area, they did it through the House Appropriations Committee. And that is my dream, to be able to do things on that magnitude at some point when I get enough seniority on that committee, and there's some talk of earmarks coming back in some different form, where I would be able to get that kind of power. But in addition to that, I put in for a waiver to be able also to serve on the Oversight Committee. So I'm here to tell you, if the Democrats resume control in 2018, I will be part of that committee doing those investigations. All right, last question. All right, this is very much the same as the last one. Can you do anything to have FEMA rework cost of snow removal for our town? Cost was in excess of $48,000, and about 5 men work for free to help. We can certainly look into it, can't we, Bob? Yeah. Let's. Who's okay? Yeah. Let's work on that. Let's talk about that.
Actually, they're all in trouble. They only had $10,000 budget for it.
Right.
And they didn't make enough to qualify for FEMA, which is a joke of the year, FEMA. Anytime you need them, they're never there. They always have an excuse.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. We have lots more things we can talk about. I'm going to hang around for a few minutes. If there's some burning question that I didn't get to that you want answered, come up after we're done. Thanks for coming out tonight.